So welcome to this Wise Owl tutorial on writing SQL. It's the Microsoft dialect of SQL, so it's called Transact SQL or T-SQL. If you're writing SQL in Management Studio or in Visual Studio Code, this is almost certainly the dialect for you. And even if you're using other dialects, you'll probably find a lot of the principles outlined useful. But enough of that. Here's what you'll learn during the tutorial. So we'll begin with how to take queries you've written and rewrite them to add comments and indentation and generally make them look neater. And then we'll look at doing the same thing with queries generated in Management Studio. And then doing the same thing with queries which you've created from View Designer. I wish this had been available years ago, it would have saved me so much time. We'll then look at blind SQL programming. So that's where you ask an AI tool to create a query without it knowing the underlying database structure. It sounds impossible, but it's actually remarkably effective. Then we'll look at the example database which we're going to be using. I'll show you how to load that in. And then we'll look at how you can get an AI tool to understand what's called the database schema, so the tables and relationships that it contains. And then we'll look at how you can generate database SQL queries in your AI tool based on this database. Then we'll look at how you can debug SQL that you've written. And finally, a couple of advanced points. We'll look at how you can generate stored procedures and how you can optimize your queries to make sure they run efficiently. But I think that's enough of looking at me. I'm going to vanish now, as I tend to do, and let's get started. So I'll start by showing how you can reformat queries you've written. Here's a query I created earlier, and it works perfectly. If I execute it, it lists out the films sorted by director name and film name. It's not that easy to understand because there's no indentation and no commenting to speak of either. So what I could do is I could copy that into an AI tool. And that's what I'm going to do. I've cheated a little bit when I paste this. I've added in an extra bit at the top to say, please add indentation and comments to the following SQL to make it easier to read. So if I run this, you should see that it gives you more readable, well-indented version of your SQL with explanatory comments, but it will be functionally exactly the same. You used to have to do this sort of thing by using websites like Poor SQL, but I think it's easier to do it in an AI tool. What happens though if I don't want to use these coding conventions? There's a web page on our website listing out the Wise Owl coding conventions for SQL, and I've included the URL for it in the information attached to the video on our website. So what I could do is I could ask ChatGPT to use this instead. I'm going to do this a rather strange way. I'm going to say, please add indentation and comments to the following SQL to make it easier to read. And then rather than giving the website address, I said, to get the coding standards to use, please search for this term, Wise Owl Training SQL Coding Conventions. And this should lead to a web page which gives you the coding conventions I'd like you to apply. Now this may seem a very roundabout way to get to the right point, but the reason I've done this is I've run this query twice while preparing this video. There's always a lot of preparation goes on behind the scenes. The first time it worked perfectly, but the second time, ChatGPT stubbornly refused to admit that it could access the web page and suggested I search for this term instead. So that's exactly what I'm doing now. So even though I can't visit the web page for some bizarre reason, you can definitely find it from the search term. And you can see that it's definitely accessing the Wise Owl web page. Is listed all conventions it's picked up from there at the bottom. And it's given me actually a very, very similar query, but that's because our standard coding conventions are pretty standard. So what you could do is write your own version of these coding conventions in a text file or on a web page and get ChatGPT to access those instead to apply your very own unique style of formatting. So we've looked at how to reformat queries that you've written. How about queries written by Microsoft? I'm going to right-click on the Director table and choose Select Top 10,000 Rows. And what it will do, as always, is generate a query looking like this. Now, there's always so much I don't like about this. One thing is I don't want to select the top 10,000 rows. I want all of them. There aren't that many directors. I hate these square brackets. I want to get rid of those. And I want to get rid of the database name and the schema there. And finally, and this is a bit controversial, I want to put my commas after each field and not before, which I'm aware is a fairly niche and unpopular view, but it's just what I'm used to. Sorry about that, folks. So what I'm going to do is copy that. I won't do it because I've already got it in my clipboard actually, and paste it into a new AI query. So I've said, please remove the top 1,000. It actually should be 10,000, let's be exact, and square brackets from the following SQL query. Put the commas after each column name and not before. Remove any database or schema prefixes and give the table name, this is an extra, a single character lowercase alias using as. So basically I'll have that being called D, and then prefix each column name with this alias, which makes the query much easier to maintain and understand, I think. And finally, add a single line comment at the top of the query explaining what it's doing. So you'll have spotted, I hope, that this is a generic query. I've included it in the list of queries for the video on our website, which you can use time and time again. Now, if I run that, it saves me an astonishing amount of time and generates an absolutely perfect query. This is the sort of thing AI tools were built for. So this is possibly one of my favorite uses of AI, just because of the sheer amount of time it saves. But see what you think. You can create a query joining tables together in a couple of ways in SQL Server Management Studio. One way is to right-click on views and choose to create a new view. And then you can choose the tables you want to link together. And it will automatically pick up on any relationships between them. And you can tick the fields you want to include, and it will generate the SQL at the bottom. There's another very, very similar way to do it, which is what I'm going to show now, which is to create a new query and just right-click in that and choose Design Query in Editor. Probably slightly easier to get to. So we're going to create a new query listing out the directors, films, and genres. So I'll add those in. I'll tick the director's full name and give this an alias. I'll call that director name. And I'll also include the film title and the genre. And just for good measure, let's sort them alphabetically by the director. So it's been busy writing some SQL down at the bottom. When you choose OK, that will appear in the window. And it's clearly a much quicker way to create your query than writing all the joins in. But the problem is, it's quite hard to read. So what you can do is to copy that to the clipboard. Then go to your favorite AI tool. You can then paste in this generic prompt. Remove the top clause from the following SQL query. Put the commas after each column name. We've talked about that. We're so over that. And indent the query properly. Remove any database or schema prefixes. I've got 2 commas there. Give each table a sensible alias, and then prefix each column name with this alias. And I think the easiest way to judge this is by the results. So if I now paste in my SQL, which I copied, and try running that, then almost instantly, just look at that. And then I can copy my code in to my SQL query. And just in case you're in any doubt whether this actually works or not, I can paste in the SQL, which I've got in the clipboard, check I've got the right database selected there, execute this, and it will give me the correct answer. So what I mean by blind programming in this context is asking an AI tool like ChatGPT to generate a query without it knowing what the underlying database schema is. So let me give you an example of what I mean by this. Supposing we want to create a query listing out for each director in our database the number of films they've made and the number of actors who have appeared in these. Well, that's a reasonable question, but a pretty tough one to answer because ChatGPT doesn't know what all the tables and fields are, nor what the relationships between them. So what it's going to have to do is make some intelligent guesses, and they will be very intelligent. And it's guessed as a table called directors, a table called films, a table called actors, and this is really clever. It's worked out there's probably a link bridging table between them. It doesn't always do this. I've run this a few times. Sometimes it gets that table, sometimes it doesn't. And it's created some SQL, which would actually work, although you'd have to do a bit of renaming of tables and columns. So you can go one step further than this by giving it some information about the underlying database. So I've got exactly the same query here, but I've added some information which should be helpful. You can assume the following tables exist. So I've told it there's a table of director, film, role, and actor, but it's up to ChatGPT to work out how those tools relate to each other. And I've said that the link fields are called director ID, film ID, role ID, and actor ID, and that will save me having to rename fields in the final query. So let's try running that and see how well it works. It should get something pretty close to a workable answer. Let's try copying that and see if it works in SQL Server. So if I paste this in, just switch to my Movies 2 database and try running this, You can see it's nearly worked. Because I didn't tell it the director name was called a full name, which it is, I'm going to have to go through and change that on each occasion. Now, I think that's probably the only mistake it made. So if I try running that, yeah, it gives me a workable answer. So you don't necessarily have to give ChatGPT or any other AI tool a full schema of your database. You can give it hints, and that might be enough to infer the rest. If you want to follow along with the examples in the rest of this tutorial, you'll have to download the example database, and this bit of the tutorial shows how to do just that. You can go to the link contained in the YouTube video, and what it will do is show you not just the video, you can see that here, but also the files attached to it. So if you click on this tab, and you can see there's two files attached, and I can click on this link to download a zip copy of the files, and were I to click on that, I could then extract the files from it. And what I'm going to do now is show you how to open this file, creating the movies database in SQL Server Management Studio, and run it. So in SQL Server Management Studio, I can choose File from the menu and choose Open, and then choose File. I can go to where I put the file, which in this case is this YSL folder, and double-click on it. And then I can execute the file, and what it will do is generate the database. Please do take account of this comment at the top. It's purely for your private use for this tutorial and not for redistribution in any way. So you can see that's completed successfully, quite quickly as well. I can't see my database because I need to refresh my list of databases. So I can right-click on databases and choose refresh. And you can see in the movies_02 database, I've got a number of different tables. So for example, I could right-click on the films table, choose select top 10,000 rows, and I'll see 3,700 films. So you've now got the database, and you can continue with the rest of this tutorial to write queries getting data out of it. So now we have a database. We need to find a way to tell ChatGPT or any other AI tool about the tables and relationships and columns that it contains. And there are three ways I can think of doing that. What I thought I'd do is show you the three ways, but then we'll just concentrate on one of them. So one way would be to create a new query, and I'm going to paste in code, which I've included in the notes for this video on our website. And if I run this, you'll see it gives me a definition of all the tables and relationships and columns in the database. And what I could then do is to copy that with the headers into an Excel spreadsheet and load that file into a ChatGPT or other AI tool window. And with a bit of luck, it will give it all the information it needed to understand the database. I haven't had great results with that, even though I think it should work. So maybe it's something you could try on your own. The second thing I could do is see if there's a database diagram. If there isn't, you could right-click to create one. But on this occasion, I have actually got one. And if I right-click on that to modify it, you can see it contains a diagrammatic representation of the database and all the relationships. And in theory, I could do a screenshot of that and pass that into the AI tool, and it would have all the information it needed to understand the database. But again, I haven't had great results with that either. The third way is to right-click on your database and choose Tasks, and then if you choose to generate scripts, choose Next to go and past the first stage of the wizard. And then you can either select all the individual objects you want to script, but I'm going to do the entire database because all it does is contain loads of tables. Then go on to the next stage. And then I could, if I like, click on this Advanced button and decide whether I want to include the type of data, the schema, or the schema and the data. So do I want the structure of the tables and the data they contain, or do I just want the schema only, just the structure of the tables? Because this is an AI tool, it really doesn't need to know about the data. It just needs to know what the columns and tables are called. And I don't really want to pass the data to an AI tool based somewhere in America. So I'm just going to leave that as schema only. And I'll choose to create this in a new query window. So I can choose Next and Next. And what it's doing is it's a bit over the top this. It comes up with a whole list of all the different actions and tasks it's done. And then I can click on Finish, and there's my script. So as you look down, you can see it's defining all the tables and columns. So what I'll do is I'll save that, choose File, Save As, and I'll call this, and hopefully I might have a name in my clipboard. I do, Generating Movies Database Schema, so I can save that. What I can then do is go into my AI tool. I'm using ChatGPT, you won't be surprised to know. And this is something where I'm going to want to write the queries based on this database quite frequently, and I don't want to have to keep giving it the same base instructions. So this is ideal in ChatGPT for creating a new project. So I'll call this querying the movies database. So whenever I want to do that, I won't have to reinvent the wheel. So what I can now do is to say that this file contains the script to generate a SQL Server database of movies. Actually, it doesn't. I need to add that in. Whenever I ask you to write a SQL query, please assume that the tables, columns, and relationships defined in this script exist. So I can now run that. And what it will do is read down that schema and check it makes sense to it. And this is where the value added becomes quite incredible, because it tells me all about it and then asks me to create some sample data insertion scripts. The previous time I ran this, it actually asked me, did I want it to generate a picture of the database diagrams? And when I said yes, it created a fantastic image showing how all the relationships link together. This time it's gone for a different approach. That's what probabilistic AI does. You get different results on different occasions. So I'm now all set up to try running some scripts. So it's time to test all this. Is all our hard work going to pay off? Let's try our first query. Please generate a SQL query showing the names of the 5 directors who have made the most films in a sensible order. Let's see what it gives us. After a short pause, it looks plausible. Does it work? If I copy that code, create a new query, paste it in, and try running it, that looks extremely plausible to me. I'm not going to fact check any of these, but that does look correct. So let's try a second example. Create a query which lists those films which have won 10 or more Oscars in runtime order with the longest film first, showing alongside each film title its genre and director. It's a fairly straightforward query, but it's so much quicker to get an AI tool to do it than to write it yourself. Let's see what it gives us. And now if I copy that code, and as before, let's try it out in SQL Server Management Studio in a new query. I'll paste it in, try running that. And again, I happen to know those are the 4 films which have won 10 or more Oscars, and it's giving me all the information alongside it. So it's just so much quicker than doing it yourself. I hope I've now convinced you that it's going to be quicker to generate queries in an AI tool for basic things than it is to do yourself, which is bad news, I'm afraid, for the world's army of SQL programmers. But I guess morality doesn't enter into these tutorials. What I'm going to do now is to try a much more complicated query. Let's call the actor who has had most roles Bob, and it's up to you to see who Bob is. So it's got to work that out. Create a query which shows all of the actors who have co-starred with Bob in at least 2 films. Sorted so the actor who's co-starred the most with Bob appears at the top of the list. So it's basically going to find the busiest actor in our database and then work out all the people who have appeared alongside him in at least 2 films. That's a pretty challenging query. Let's see how it gets on. And I promise you, I haven't actually looked at this yet, so I'm quite excited myself to see what is going to be the answer. Had it been me, I would have used common table expressions, and I'm pleased to see that that's what it's doing too. So it's used a common table expression to find the ID and name of the actor who's had the most roles. Then it's linked that to the roles, and then it's found the co-stars, and finally it's given the final information. But does it work? It looks quite convincing, I have to say. So what I'll do is create a new query and try pasting this in and running it. I don't need that semicolon, but it won't do any harm. And after a short pause, okay, that looks very plausible. I could have done with knowing the name of the actor. So let's just run this little bit of script here. Samuel L. Jackson. I think he probably was the busiest actor. And certainly that all looks pretty plausible. The problem, as ever, is if there's any bugs in it at all, or if you want to fact check it to prove the data's actually correct, you're still going to have to know SQL inside out. So although AI tools can speed up your development work, they aren't actually a replacement for programmers, despite my previous comments. I think what I want to illustrate with debugging is not that an AI tool can do it, because they can, but how little source information they need. So I've got a query here, which is, as the comment is showing, should be listing out for each film its director and studio. But it's got an error in. I can see that for 2 reasons. One is I've got some red squiggly underlines there, but when I try to execute it, it gives me an error. The error, by the way, I'm going to give you a sneak preview, is the most common error in SQL, which is somebody has missed out a comma. Perhaps if this person put their commas before the field rather than after, it would have been easier to see. So what I could do is copy and paste this into an AI tool and see if I can see what's going wrong. It would be tempting to think I would have to include this in my previous project I created, so it needs to know all about the tables and fields. But in fact, what I tend to find is it hardly needs any information at all. So I've just said, why is the following SQL query giving me an error without any additional information? When I run that, after a second or two, it tells me I'm missing a comma between the fields. Well, it was going to, it seems to have suddenly paused on that. Let's just try running that again. And it tells me in a slightly different format exactly what the problem should be and a corrected query as well. It says at the end that I won't be able to use direct as an alias, but actually in SQL Server Management Studio, that will work absolutely fine. So that's a bit of a red herring. So, as with so many things, AI tools can vastly speed up your work by finding irritating bugs much quicker than you can, I'm afraid. It would be a mistake to think that AI tools can only write queries in SQL. They're just as comfortable writing stored procedures. So let's try this one. Before I proceed, this is my project for querying the movies database, which contained the script giving the schema of the database. And I think I missed a trick here. I think I should have added this file to the project itself. So that's what I'm going to do now. So there's my script from previously. And once it's added that, I think I'm probably safer referencing it in this chat. So what I'll do is run this prompt. Create a stored procedure called sp_add_role. And what it should do is insert a new role into the table of roles, given 3 parameters: the full name of the actor, so who it was, the title of the film, so which film they appeared in, and the name of the character they played. And then the procedure should return an error message if one of the following happens. So basically, if you try choosing to insert an actor and the actor doesn't exist in the actors table, that will give an error. Likewise, if you choose a film which doesn't exist. And the third possible error is you try adding somebody to a role where they've already appear in the roles table. So if, for example, you say Harrison Ford appears in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but he's already a member of the roles table, that should be an error message too. Otherwise, the procedure should add the role into the roles table and return a message saying this has happened, and just as a bonus, giving the new role number. Let's try running that. And after the usual short pause, which I've missed out, you can see it generating the last bit of the stored procedure. So what it's done is it's put in the parameters there to the stored procedure. It's declared some variables. It's trying to get the actor ID there and raising an error if there isn't any such actor. Then it's doing the same with the film and raising an error if there's no such film with that title. Then it's checking to see if the role already exists and raising an error to see if it does. And finally, if all of that is okay, it's adding the role, and then scope identity will give you the unique primary key number of the role added, and it's printing that out. So I'm sure you'll be looking at this thinking, I could have done this myself. But would you have been as quick? So what we're going to do now is to copy that code and see if it actually works. I'm going to go back to SQL Server Management Studio. Let's try pasting it in. And then I'll create the store procedure. So that command is completed successfully. And now I can try running it. So let's have a quick look at who already exists. So that's the list of the actors. Tom Cruise is number 1. He sounds a good person to choose. In terms of films, I don't think he was in Jurassic Park, so let's choose film number 1 as well. And I'm pretty certain if I were to look down the list of roles, he wouldn't be in it. So what we can do is to add in, you may notice that is a last role, by the way. That should change soon. So let's see if we can get it to change. So I'll type in the name of my stored procedure. And then the parameters were the film title, which is going to be Jurassic Park. I've got to spell this exactly correctly. The actor's name, Tom Cruise. I think I've just realized I've got those 2 in the wrong order, so I'll just swap them around. And then finally, I need the role he played, and let's say he played Bob. So let's try running that. Looking good. It's added a role 260, whatever it is, I can't read it. And if I run this previous script, you can see Bob's been added. If I then run this again a second time, it should give me an error message because the role for this actor and film already exists. And if I try changing this, let's say Tom Bob, so he doesn't exist, and try running this, it should give me an error. No actor with this name exists. And finally, just for the sake of completeness, let's change it to Jurassic Pork, which sounds a very unlikely film name. And that also gives me the error. So it's written absolutely perfect stored procedure for me in about 5 seconds. So for the last part of this tutorial, I thought I'd briefly show how you can ask an AI tool to optimize your SQL. What I'm doing is taking a deliberately poor view. This is from one of our internal databases, and I wrote it as I do all my queries just to be as quick as possible without really optimizing it. So what I'm going to do is copy that and see if I can get ChatGPT to improve it. So the first thing I'm going to do is post in a pretty standard prompt. Review the following SQL query and make suggestions on how I could improve it, and particularly with a view to make it run more quickly. And then what I'll do is paste in the query itself and see what it comes up with. Now, before I run this, just to warn you, if you ask an AI tool to improve your query, you'll get an answer. It's like one of those irritating people who always have a view on everything. So don't ask this unless you're prepared to have quite a few suggestions thrown back at you. The number one suggestion it will always make is usually to index fields, although having said that, on this occasion it's number 3. Indexing is obviously the number one thing you can do to improve performance. In this case, it's suggesting that I'm repeating a calculation. It's suggesting remove my commented out code. Well, fair enough. It also doesn't like the fact that I'm routinely concatenating or converting integers to text. And I think basically it can't find much wrong with it, but that's because it's not a very complicated query. Now, I've done this with much more complicated queries, and it does come up with fairly sensible suggestions. Things like avoiding calling functions within stored procedures is pretty standard. For myself, I'm not too worried if my queries are slightly suboptimal, so I don't tend to use this particular part of AI tools for improving my SQL, but it might help you in your working life. And with that, I've come to the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Have fun with your SQL and your AI tools, and please do revisit soon. There's so much more on our website at wiseowl.co.uk, including blogs, shorter tips, tutorials on SQL and VBA, hundreds of exercises in all sorts of different software applications, and a chance to test your skills in a few selected software applications. In addition to all of that, you can watch our video tutorials like this one in all these different subjects. Or you could consider booking one of our training courses, whether it be classroom, on-site, or online, or even as one-to-one consultancy. Thank you for watching.